Europe, 1807. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, has proven once again that he is the master of war. Having won a decisive victory against Russian forces in Friedland, modern-day Kaliningrad, he signs a peace treaty with Alexander I at Tilsit. Yet even though both nations now have a formal alliance between them, relations in the immediate aftermath begin to heat up once again. Soon, Napoleon would be on the warpath, a 19th century Caesar crossing his Rubicon. Except this time, the French emperor would regret ever setting foot in the land of his enemy. On this week's special two-part episode of Special Area Slip-Ups, we take a look at Napoleon's 1812 invasion of Russia and the reasons behind this massive campaign. The Treaty of Tilsit had several problems about it that pestered both sides in the years following its signing. The first reason for this nuisance was traditional. Napoleon had created a Duchy of Warsaw, leading the Russian government to fear the creation of an entirely independent Polish state, because for centuries, Russia and Poland have been thorns in each other's sides. Then Napoleon offered to marry Alexander's sister, Grand Duchess Anna Pavlovna, in order to cement the alliance, a rather typical action of the time. But the Romanov dynasty, which both Anna and Tsar Alexander were a part of, hated the idea and refused his offers for a whole year. Napoleon had to end up marrying the daughter of the Austrian emperor instead. Then in 1810, Napoleon annexed or took over the Duchy of Oldenburg, then ruled by Alexander's sister's father-in-law. Yes, very confusing family ties. This was in direct violation of the treaty, and it enraged the Romanovs even more. Yet perhaps worst of all was the Franco-Russian fallout over the continental system, the economic blockade attempted by Napoleon and his allies to starve Britain, then the emperor's worst enemy. The hugely unpopular trade restrictions as a result were disastrous to the Russian economy in a time of recession and economic crisis. Soon Napoleon discovered what would have been inevitable: illegal trade occurring between Russia and Britain. Furious at this breach of the system, the two emperors began to call each other out for bad faith on the part of the Treaty of Tilsit. Preparations for war began shortly thereafter. Initially, Napoleon claimed that the war was an act to defend Poland from Russian aggression, even going so far as to call the campaign the Second Polish War in order to gain favor with his Central European allies. This ruse did little to hide the real intentions that the French emperor had, however. All in Europe knew that Napoleon wanted to pressure Alexander I to cease trading with Britain, thus forcing his country's main enemy to sue for peace as a result of the economic blockade. He believed that the Tsar would bow to the French if he managed to occupy enough cities, including Moscow, the spiritual heartland of the Russian people. Technically, however, the capital of Russia at this time was St. Petersburg to the north, so for us nowadays, this objective seems rather counterintuitive. Regardless of what his enemies and observers thought, Napoleon was about to undertake the greatest campaign of his military career thus far. Russia's sheer scale and manpower was an enemy he had known all too well in previous battles, and invading the largest country in Europe required the largest army Europe had ever seen. Calling upon his allies across the continent, Napoleon gathered almost 600,000 men of French, Prussian, Polish, Saxon, Westphalian, Bavarian, Italian, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, Swiss, Croat, and Austrian nationality to launch the largest invasion ever seen. On the 24th of June 1812, this colossal army crossed the Niemen River into Russian territory, thus beginning the bloodiest and costliest chapter in Napoleon's saga of military genius. The first few months of the campaign were already proving problematic to the French emperor. His troops, who were once feared for their speed in battle, were now bogged down as a result of their sheer size. What's more, the supply situation was growing bleaker by the day. Napoleon had originally set up long caravan lines from friendly territory into the Russian countryside, but in the summer heat, Russia's poor road system was made even worse when dirt turned to mud, bogging down many wagon trains along the route. By August, thousands of soldiers had already deserted or died as a result of the sweltering summer heat, diseases, and forced marching. Yet Napoleon was still determined to crush this thorn in his European alliance, and so onwards marched his troops. By August 19th, the largest engagement of the war had been concluded at Smolensk. Keep that name in mind, it will be of importance to us later. Great importance, I should add. The Russians had learned from their lessons fighting Napoleon earlier, and now knew that a strategy of delay rather than attack would serve them best. The Russian generals under the command of Kutuzov also employed scorched earth tactics, destroying wells and burning farmland to deny precious food resources to the lumbering Grande Armée. By September, Napoleon had a hard choice ahead of him. His troops were exhausted from marching, and they wished to stay the winter in Smolensk, where the supply situation could be improved and where they could wait out for the spring thaw to make the ground much more easier to march and fight in. Moscow was a staggering 370 kilometers away, and the dreaded Russian winter was on the horizon as well. Ever the gambler, Napoleon opted to force another march, this time to the capital of the spiritual heartland of Moscow, and, or so he hoped, the end of the war. Join us next week as we cover the disastrous retreat of this once proud army across the Russian steppes in freezing winter conditions. In the month between Napoleon's victory at Smolensk and his arrival into Moscow, his army fought one of the deadliest engagements of their time, in which an estimated 72,000 troops from both sides perished. It might be a good idea if you're interested to watch this amazingly narrated and illustrated mini-documentary from EpicHistoryTV about the Battle of Borodino. Many thanks to EpicHistoryTV for providing me with the personal education on Napoleon's campaigns both in Russia and before and beyond. You might as well go check their channel out if you're interested in this time period. That was not a sponsored plug. See you next week, scholars.